Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt, and today we're going to be continuing our coverage of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest for the Battlecry classes Commander and Guardian. So I'd originally wanted to go and do a little more in-depth, and I probably still plan to for future weeks, but just with the nature of the new Starfinder field test dropping and the new Howl of the Wild book appearing in my PDF downloads, because I'm a subscriber. If you don't subscribe to the rulebooks, you should. You get them early sometimes. It's great. But yeah, so with all that going on, I didn't have as much time to type up as much analysis, but I did want to get some stuff out here to talk about this week because even without going super in-depth round to round, there are clearly some takeaways that I thought were pretty important. Keep in mind, we've done very low level so far playtests. We haven't done, I think, we haven't even hit level 5 yet. So, this could all get drastically different as we go, and that's sort of what I wanted to do, was just examine them, the classes in these chunks of levels so that we can give feedback at those different levels of play. So far, it does look like both classes are sort of hitting their niche, or at least fulfilling the idea that was pitched. So I think the basis is good. The bones of these classes are very good. There are some questionable bits and pieces here and there, which we'll kind of talk about. Going somewhat in order, I'm going to start with the Guardian. It can definitely overdo its gimmick, which is, this frontliner who protects its allies. And maybe that's okay, but right now you can pretty easily get yourself into a dangerous spot if you're not careful. We had a couple of rather close calls in our game, but when used with caution, their kit really does seem to hit a lot of the right notes. It's worth noting as well that as long as the Guardian is up, it's really, really hard to focus down any other player on the field. That said, especially at these lower levels, it feels easy to get knocked down. And maybe that's okay. After all, that means you've prevented at least a couple of attacks going to your allies, and I can see that sacrifice play being fun, and certainly your allies not having to worry about getting hit might allow them to go ham on offense and melt enemies before they melt you. But it shouldn't be as common as it looks so far. And of course, we're at low level. As we gain levels, the HP might catch up to boss crits a little more, so it could be enough as is. A lot of classes like Barbarian, which is funnily, I think, more similar to the Guardian than the Champion in some ways. But the Barbarian is a great example of a class that can be very difficult to survive low levels, but as their HP catches up with their playstyle, they get into a much better place. So it's not necessarily a deal breaker if that's the case, but it is worth being aware of. Before we actually got these classes, I and some of my friends, we had talked about possibly making them a key con or even a 12 hit point per level. But it feels like it would be easy to overdo this, and take all the drama and risk out of this character's playstyle if the class had too much HP. So after getting hands on it, I definitely would be careful about recommending that in feedback. The only thing I want to say for certain about the Guardian is that Hampering sweeps is very cool and probably a bit too strong. I'll be trying to think about recommendations of that for feedback. Right now I don't have any that I'm super firm on. I hope a version of it stays. In fact, I hope it becomes folded into the core chassis or in some other way is made to be not poachable by other classes. I think it's a really cool thematic ability for the Guardian, and I do hope that it keeps it as an exclusive feature, both because it's very strong and could interact very dangerously. Being stuck next to a Barbarian is very different than being stuck next to a Guardian, just as an example. Hopefully it's not poachable, but in the same breath, I hope that it is on the core chassis, or at least survives as a feat or some form to be there, just toned down. If you're not familiar, Hampering Sweeps is basically a nice little action you can take. I think it's 2 actions that can hit enemies all around you, and rather than deal damage, it locks them in so that they cannot leave your weapon's reach, which means that functionally, depending on the type of encounter you're having, if you just have one big boss, that means all of your allies can stay away and just pelt it from a distance, while healers keep the Guardian up and just rinse and repeat. Commander is very effective It's still too soon for me to decide if it's too effective, but swinging the action economy in the way that it does seem to have an effect on encounter balance, at least for moderate encounters and below. It seems like it might be evening out a little bit against tougher encounters, at least at this level, but more playtesting is obviously needed. The group mobility and repositioning is very cool, and being able to tell your hardest hitting ally, in this case a war priest amped up on runic weapon and zeal domain, swinging a big two-handed weapon, but being able to tell your hardest hitter to strike again at full attack bonus is very effective and quite rewarding from the fantasy of the class. Very cool. Just might need a limiter of some kind. I'm not sure yet. We'll see as it goes. In addition to possibly swinging the action economy, it also feels kind of repetitive. Again, very low level right now, very few tools available to it. But more than anybody else, any other character on the field, and we had 5, sometimes 6 characters in this playtest, it's a very, if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of approach in terms of how it uses its rounds, where the Guardian has to be very careful about which of its abilities it uses, or it could end up in a desperate situation. The Commander, in contrast, only had to deviate from its core game plan of strike hard and form up, I think, for the two. Only a couple of times over 4 encounters and probably maybe 15-ish, 20-ish rounds at most. That's not a bad thing, I guess, but, especially at low levels. But again, it was very noticeable that one character was doing the exact same thing every round, whereas everybody else had decisions to make. And on an intelligence-based class, so far, those have been some of the more complex characters to play. This could be our lowest skill floor intelligence-based class. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but it is, again, worth noting. What I keep coming back to, again, is that even at low levels, it seems like having access to only 2 of your tactics per day, week over week, would start to feel very restrictive and boring. Yes, you can swap them out, but you most likely have a couple of very broad or broadly applicable ones, like I mentioned, and then a couple of others that you have for niches on days when you're going to be going into specific situations that you might swap out. But they would be the exception to the rule. Now, in the playtest feedback, there is a version suggested where it's, we don't know exactly, but it's sort of like you have fewer tactics available to pick from, but you get to have more of them active at a time. So sort of like switching between a prepared caster to a spontaneous caster, right? Where you've got fewer tools, but you can apply them, whenever you want, versus having to pick a few at the beginning of the day. I don't know which is better, but I think that I would probably like that more. I'm probably not going to necessarily test that. If I get time, we might, but without knowing the exact structure they have in mind, it feels kind of moot to try. But it is, again, worth noting. I really think having just a couple more, even at low levels, even if they had to be a little weaker or a little less universally useful, would do a lot for making the class feel more fun and have more variety. Also, something we observed is, despite the flavor in the example art they showed, it feels like a melee commander is kind of rough and might actually need that mount option that's available in the feats in order to have any sort of mobility or action economy on its own, since it's using so many of its actions on its allies. It might even need action economy hacks itself, but it already shifts the action economy so much into the party's favor that feels like a solution that would be ripe to make things worse in terms of trying to balance encounters. Maybe, again, at higher levels, we'll find that things even out and it gets a little less universally good with just the couple of broadest abilities. And maybe we'll see that they do need to branch out more round to round, but right now it's looking very restrictive on action economy, and while effective, somewhat boring. So we'll be covering the higher levels each week as we go, and like I said, we'll try to get the Howl of the Wild and hopefully some Starfinder playtest feedback. But right now, we're just very excited to be all in on this Battlecry playtest. We've gotten to do a lot of playtesting, and we have a lot more planned. So come back and let us know how your playtests are doing down in the comments. and let's try to give Paizo the best feedback we can. As always, thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate any likes and subscribes you can send our way. And with that, we'll see you next time. Bye.